be talking Birthright Citizenship and the Caravan. And thank you for tuning in to Fair Facebook Live. If you want to give yourself a brain a rest, if you want to give yourself an opportunity to hear some real information and news without the constant bashing of the Trump administration or the idiotic ad hominem attacks, this is the place to be. And I'll just add this parenthetical while we start. A lot of the news coverage today as we come up to this election is nothing short of appalling, unprofessional, poorly thought out, biased, reprehensible, lacking any kind of journalistic integrity. I've been a guest on CNN, for example, probably going on almost 35 years now. I have never seen anything like the spectacle of what used to be considered a news channel. No longer can you call CNN a news channel. It is now essentially an opinion and advocacy network. And other networks like MSNBC should probably have to file with the FEC as campaign expenditures because they're really nothing more than extended campaign commercials. But here at FAIR and IRLI, the Immigration Law Institute, you will get the facts. And today we're going to talk about some of the most important issues facing America. And as always, we are monitoring our Facebook Live channel here, and therefore, as I scroll down to our feed and check out the comments, I can monitor what you're doing in the way of questions and asking you to ask us questions because Dale here is an expert on all things caravan. He's just come back from the border.
This is true.
We're both kind of experts on the question of birthright citizenship. And so honestly, this is your opportunity to talk to some folks who really understand these issues, okay? Now, I happen to notice down there on the bottom of the screen, you may have noticed this. I'm not going to make a big deal about it, but I did see a little donate button down there. I think that says donate. Maybe it's Donato. No, it's definitely donate. It's a donate button. Just suggesting as we come up toward our year-end drive, and we'll be doing a big campaign around Thanksgiving, to have your 24-hour-a-day watchdog organization working on behalf of the American people. It doesn't come cheap. We're only here because of you. We can only do the work because of you. And therefore, if you feel inclined to hit that donate button, you will find it's very easy to make a contribution to FAIR. And if you would like to earmark that donation to the Immigration Reform Law Institute, we can accommodate that as well. Just make a notation in your donation as well. However, let's move now to the business at hand. Dale, you just came back from the border. What's the latest on the caravan?
What's the latest on the caravan? We have about 7,000 individuals headed toward our border. There are 3 groups, I believe, in the caravan now, and the closest group is about 1,000 miles away.
1,000 miles from San Diego or from Texas?
From Texas, yes.
So they're really more about 1,500 miles from San Diego.
Correct, yes.
Do we know where they're headed?
At this point, no. And I'm sure that the groups that are leading them, because obviously we know this is not a spontaneous movement. This is a movement created by leftists.
Pinch me. You're telling me that 7,000 people just stood up one day and started to march.
Yeah, right.
Because
that didn't happen.
Gandhi was right there. He stood up and said, "Follow me."
This did not happen.
So how did it start?
It's actually led by a group that their English name is Peoples Without Borders. So you can imagine what their goal is there. There are other groups that are actually mixed in with them. I even read about a Swedish group. Now, what on earth is this Swedish group doing over here? But they're anti-border, anti-guns.
So are they anti-government?
Most likely.
They must want some government somewhere.
Well,
just not our government.
Not our government. Maybe a socialist, communist type government.
And so to organize 7,000 people is not easy.
No, it's not.
How do they do it? What kind of money?
Well, they're getting money from nefarious groups, individuals. George Soros and his. Yes, there's the name.
Oh, no. He said George Soros. I have to disavow that comment. We all know that George Soros is not actively involved in funding radical, ultra left-wing causes, not only here, but globally. Oh, did I say globally? Oh, my gosh. I mean in Europe and places like that. Who else is funding it besides Soros?
Well, you have many of the left-leaning open borders groups in the United States. They're providing assistance. You even sadly have some of the Central American countries who are lending assistance, and we've heard stories of individuals down there giving rides to people in these caravans, moving them along, not wanting them to stay in their city, but helping them along to the next city.
Doreen, thank you, Doreen, mentions what happened in Europe in 2015. Is that what's going to be happening here unless something changes?
Absolutely, that's what's going to happen. We've seen with the group that's now stationed on the Guatemalan-Mexico border.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much, Michelle. Michelle donated.
That group has been particularly violent and tearing down fences and throwing rocks and bottles at Mexican immigration agents. So it's been reported there are many criminal aliens amongst these groups and gang members.
How do you organize 7,000 people? This is just putting aside the question of logistics. 7,000 people create a lot of waste, human waste, every single day. Okay, in order to actually handle that, I mean, you would have to orchestrate this process.
Absolutely. And in fact, the violence inside the groups has been getting so bad. Yesterday, they declared a rest day, and they started establishing security teams to patrol.
Because they're abducting children and that kind of thing.
Yes. So this is a very organized effort. Make no mistake. It's an organized political stunt that's meant to undermine.
Yeah, except that in political stunt, which has real consequences, like how many of the people who came in the April, many people forget the April Caravan looked very similar to this. How many of those people in the April Caravan who came illegally or presented themselves at a border officer and asked for asylum, how many have been removed or deported?
Very few.
Zero.
Yeah, very
right?
few.
Like 99% are still here.
Yes, yes.
So how are we going to see prevent a repeat of that?
Well, you know, the president has issued an order. 5,200 troops are going down to the border to help fortify the border.
So but they're just going to ask for asylum from the troops. Then
True. Trump has mentioned he's going to create tent cities. Okay, under our current system, what happens? Somebody claims asylum, they get a USCIS officer, has to interview them, make a determination, is there a credible fear? And if that officer finds credible grounds, that individual gets released into the population. That's our current system because we cannot detain all these people. Well, what Trump is planning to do is create tent cities. He's going to keep them right there at the border.
U.S. or on the Mexican side?
Well, now he has the authority to push them back over into Mexico. Now, he absolutely has that authority under the INA.
Even if they're saying, I want asylum while they're being escorted out.
He can do that. He can push them over there, and we can actually hold their asylum hearing via teleconference, video teleconference.
And what is IRLI going to do to help the president with his asylum pushback?
Well, certainly we are advising the administration on all the legal methods they can use to push back on this. Obviously, number one, the president has the power under INA Section 212F to reject any alien at the border, and this is what he should do. Now, those who claim asylum, if they come through a legitimate port of entry and claim asylum, then we will give them a date, push them back into Mexico. But if they enter the country illegally, not at a port of entry, and we apprehend them, then they claim asylum, that's when he's going to have to hold them at the border.
Mary Best Mead asked Mary, thank you. She says, how can they ask for asylum here when they have been offered and turned down by the Mexican government?
Well, this is true. Mexico has offered asylum and work permits to these people, but they're rejecting that. They want to reunite with family.
But under international law, don't they have to accept asylum in the first country where it's offered?
Technically, yes, that's the way it works. The first safe country they come to, they're supposed to stay there. Now, I read all kinds of articles yesterday. The opposition is ginning up this argument that, it's not safe in Mexico, and here are all the reasons.
Well, it's not safe in Chicago, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean you get to come here and live anywhere but Chicago.
Yeah, well, the United States...
There are parts of Mexico that are probably safer than Chicago.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. But the United States only has a first safe country agreement with Canada. We don't yet have that agreement with Mexico. So under the UN protocols that we signed way back in the 50s, we agreed to abide by these rules. And you have to have an agreement under the INA to pull that first safe country card. So we can do that with Canadians, and Canadians can do that with Americans. However, we don't have that agreement, and I would urge the president to get that agreement with Mexico.
Margaret, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Margaret, for your donation. We're up to $25, and I'm extremely proud of you. Thank you. So, in the end, what is going to prevent a recurrence? Like you have another caravan coming up from El Salvador, and supposedly there are people with weapons, guns, and things like that.
Right.
This is serious. I mean, Michael Goodwin was on Fox this morning, and he quoted someone else, I can't remember who, but he said the Constitution is not a suicide pact.
Right.
If the president gets an injunction issued out of the Ninth Circuit saying he has to accept all of them making claims, he can't detain them. I mean, this is what IRLI's fighting for, right?
Absolutely, that's what we're fighting for.
You're fighting against this kind of judicial activism.
Absolutely, we're involved in all these cases regarding asylee issues and refugee issues. So the president has the authority. He has the power. There are various tools in the INA he can use.
Thank you, Margaret.
I would suggest to the president we have what's called expedited removal. If somebody comes into the country unlawfully, we can remove them without an immigration hearing. Otherwise, under certain
That's
conditions.
the way it used to be.
Well, under the law,
Does the fact that Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General Jeff Sessions, has narrowed the basis for asylum, is that going to increase the number of denials of credible fear and therefore summary repatriation?
Oh, certainly it will. Yes, it will.
So Jeff Sessions has done a super job, and folks need to let the Trump administration know that we want to keep Jeff Sessions as long as possible in that position.
Right. His decision, matter of AB, reversed prior positions of different administrations that was leaning toward letting people in for domestic, private crimes committed on you, domestic violence, gang-related crimes. And can you imagine if we let in everybody under our asylum law who claimed they had been battered by a spouse or a partner, or who had been threatened or lives in a city with gang violence? I mean, my goodness, we would have a large portion of Central America eligible for asylum. That's not what the asylum law was meant for. It was meant for these extreme cases and for political torture, religious discrimination.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you very much for your contribution. And we were asked by Deborah. She wants to say, what do we raise the money for? And the answer, of course, is exactly this: on the question of asylum analysis. This is an area where FAIR and IRLI have been active for many years. We help provide a lot of the legal analysis and interpretation that's then used by the administration to narrow the definition of asylum. And groups like IRLI have worked closely with Jeff Sessions for years. When he was in the Senate, a lot of that legal work then goes into helping and advise the administration on drafting these new regulations to help curtail things like the asylum flood coming into our borders. What you're getting with FAIR and IRLI are real-world, hard-nosed, aggressive, professional advocacy to help this country control the floodgates, deter illegal immigration.
And in fact, even further, in the AB case that I just mentioned, where Sessions reversed the rule that people who were subject to gang violence and domestic abuse could apply for asylum, IRLI was the only group to file an amicus brief on behalf of the Attorney General. There were 14 briefs filed. 13 of those briefs were for the opposition, arguing that we should let people in who just claim gang violence or domestic abuse. IRLI was the only rule of law brief submitted in that case.
Yeah, so I mean, these are hard and fast examples of where your contribution goes and how it helps to support the works of IRLI and FAIR. And someone asked a little while ago, they said, well, so I can find it, some people seem to want to get Jeff Sessions fired. I don't know why. I mean, Jeff Sessions has been professionally involved fighting the immigration battle, sometimes all by himself in the Senate for many, many years. We would have had the Gang of Eight bill probably without massive amnesty if we had not had Jeff Sessions in the Senate. And if he were to be fired by the president after this election, who's going to take his place? Maybe Lindsey Graham.
Right.
Lindsey Graham has never been a friend of true immigration reform. Someone asked how about all-time high levels of immigration. A recent report came out from the Center for Immigration Studies analyzing census data that said that 2017 was the all-time historic high for legal and illegal immigration, 1.75 million. That's enough to double the size of the city of Philadelphia every single year. That ties the all-time historic record for the aggregate amount of legal and illegal immigration. That does not count birthright citizenship, meaning anchor babies, meaning people born here to parents here illegally. And that takes us to the question of birthright citizenship. Now on order of maybe 275, 300,000 babies born a year given automatic citizenship. Birthright citizenship is something that the president has apparently decided to tackle right before this election. We are hoping he continues after the election. Can we talk a little bit about, and Arthur, thank you very much for donating. Arthur, I really do appreciate it. Doreen, all of you who've donated, thank you very much. This is very important to our work, and I do appreciate that sincerely, from the bottom of my heart. Birthright citizenship.
Yes.
Does the president really have the authority? What's the latest thinking about, does the Constitution actually require everybody born here, no matter what the status, immigration status of the mother or nationality of the mother, are they all required to bestow U.S. citizenship on their children?
Well, you have two camps of thinking. One says if you're born on U.S. soil, you are a U.S. citizen pursuant to the 14th Amendment. Then you have the other camp that says, no, that's not what the 14th Amendment says because it has a qualifying clause in it. And if I can read it, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Key phrase.
Are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So the opposition has said, oh, that clearly says everyone born here. But see, there are two requirements. You be born on U.S. soil, the first part of the clause, and the second clause says subject to the jurisdiction. Now, looking at Supreme Court cases that have ruled on this issue, and they haven't spoken on this really since the 1890s, they have stated subject to the jurisdiction means more than just territorial jurisdiction, meaning that you're just within the country and you're subject to their traffic laws and criminal laws and whatnot. It means more than that. It means political jurisdiction. It means that you have the right to reside there. So obviously, illegal aliens don't have the right to reside, and they're not under the protection of the U.S. government.
All right, well, let's look at two people. Okay, let's look at an ambassador.
Sure.
Somebody who came in legally, who's on an A visa and therefore has diplomatic immunity. Ambassador has a child in a U.S. hospital. Is that kid considered a citizen?
No. Now, there has always been that exception.
But the birth record issued by the hospital, is that going to be reflected in the birth record?
Well, that's been a problem here. There have actually been diplomatic babies born from diplomats who have snuck through and have gotten American passports.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
All right, but what about, so let's talk about the mother. She's here, she enters the U.S. without inspection, crosses the border illegally.
Right.
An hour after coming into the country, she goes into labor and goes to a hospital in El Paso.
Yes.
How can she be subject to U.S. jurisdiction when she's never presented herself for lawful admission?
You're absolutely right.
What's the basis for assuming? I mean, the framers of the 14th Amendment had in mind people who established some political allegiance.
Right.
Certainly, you look at the debates.
Right.
They said, well, Indians, Native Americans are not because they had at the time independent tribal sovereignty, right?
Right.
14th Amendment was designed to deal with a specific problem.
Yes.
States arbitrarily on the basis of race denying citizenship to people who otherwise would be eligible.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
That was what they were trying to solve.
That's what it was designed
They were
for.
not trying to destroy the consensual basis of citizenship by saying that anybody could come in as a tourist or come in as a non-immigrant or come in illegally and bestow citizenship, right?
Absolutely right.
So why do we do it? Why has it happened this way? Why has it continued to happen for so long? And does Trump have the ability to do something by executive order?
Sadly, nobody's ever really addressed it. And
we've been around for 250 years. How can nobody have addressed it?
Nobody has really addressed it head on, and that's why we hope that by Trump bringing this to the forefront, it will make its way to the Supreme Court, and we will get a definitive decision on this. The two cases I mentioned in the 1800s that really speak to this issue, one was Elk v. Wilkins, 1884, and the court said that an individual to have birthright citizenship had to be completely subject to the United States political jurisdiction and owing them direct and immediate allegiance. Now, if you're an illegal alien, who do you owe your allegiance to? You're not a national. You haven't raised your hand. You haven't sworn allegiance to the United States, like what you do at a naturalization ceremony. Your allegiance is still with your home country. Okay,
so what about in Wong Kim Art? That was the 1896.
That was the 1898 case.
The parents were ineligible for citizenship because of the bar, Asiatic bar.
Yes.
But at the same time, how could they have established they had national allegiance when they remained citizens of China?
Well, this is true, but they had permission to be in the country. They were the equivalent, in that case, of legal permanent residents. And what the court said there was, a child becomes a citizen, and you are entitled, if you are entitled to the protection of and owe allegiance to the United States, so long as they are permitted by the United States to reside here. So, the Chinese couple, they were permitted to reside here under what would have been legal permanent residency. So that's the only thing the court has ruled. So basically LPRs, legal permanent residents, are due birthright citizenship. Now we believe that was wrongly decided because until you raise your hand and take that oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States at a naturalization ceremony, you owe allegiance still to the country where you came from, even though you're an LPR. We believe that was wrongly decided, but that is precedent currently. However, the court stated there that clearly that this couple, their child was due birthright citizenship because the parents were allowed to reside there. That clearly excludes illegal aliens. It clearly excludes tourists, because tourists do not take up residence. They're only visiting. The question gets a little bit more gray when you talk about students who are here on student visas. What happens to them when they have babies here? That'll have to be worked out. And people on work visas who have babies.
Seems to me the line is very simple. If you are intending to be here permanently as a permanent resident, then by definition, this is going to be your permanent abode. If you're in an immigration status where you can't form the requisite intent of being here permanently, meaning a non-immigrant visa, where you have to leave on a date certain, then the mother her citizenship should determine the citizenship of the child.
Right, and we've actually...
But that's hard to do because we don't have a federal citizenship document, and it's determined by state hospital birth records.
And that's the problem, the administrative problem that'll have to be worked out here, because states issue birth certificates to illegal alien children all over the U.S. Well, people take those birth certificates. That's all you need to get a passport, a U.S. passport. So you apply to the State Department, all of a sudden you receive this document that says you're a U.S. citizen.
Well, you can see how complicated certain issues are, like birthright citizenship. The Trump administration is going to need our support and assistance to try to make this thing effective. If there's going to be an executive order, or even if there's an effort congressionally. Lindsey Graham 2.0, and a new version of him, post-McCain, says he wants to support legislation in the next Congress to end birthright citizenship. In all likelihood, a lot of these efforts are not going to succeed without robust support from FAIR and IRLI. And so we have 4 people who've donated. I would love to get one more donation in before I end this broadcast of the Facebook Live. But as you can see, this work is important, and it does take time and effort. All of you know, birthright citizenship determines our sovereignty. Citizenship without consent violates the core principle in our Declaration of Independence that the legitimacy of governments derives itself from the consent of the governed. We need to get birthright citizenship under control. It's one of the magnets that is confounding the operation of U.S. immigration controls. U.S. citizen children are being used by the parents to argue they shouldn't be deported. States like Maryland have these guardianship laws now where essentially the people being deported can just sign over their kids to a guardian on the assumption that they're going to show up again illegally at some point in the future. This is no way for a modern state to run itself. And so there's a lot at stake in these issues. And for all of you who've donated, I want to thank you. For all of you who have listened, I want to tell you how much we appreciate this. On behalf of Dale Wilcox at the Immigration Reform Law Institute, I'm Dan Stein, president of FAIR. Thank you for listening.